Greetings, beloved, and welcome to the best days of your life. I hope that you are feeling favored. I hope that you are feeling mighty. I hope that you know that you are blessed, you are loved, you are important, and you are God's favorite child. Here's to the best days of your life. Today, we are looking at the works of Bruce Lipton's Epigenetics, and this is coming from It Didn't Start With You by Mark Woland. And this information is bomb, right? This is next level information. It really helps us to understand how we carry the traumas in the past, pains and past depressions and the PTSD of our parents, great grandparents, and ancestors that we have never met. So we about to get into this. This is really good. Okay, so we're looking at the work of Bruce Lipton, right? So I'm going to be connecting his work to the experiences of us today, right? Okay, so what Bruce said about DNA is that only 2% of our DNA is made up of physical attributes. And when I say this, I am talking about eye color, hair, this kind of when you think about the size of people, you know how you can see like, oh, your breasts are shaped like your mother's, or your butt and your hips. So those physical attributes are about 2% of our total DNA, right? So that's 2% of our total DNA, and 98% of our DNA is non-coding DNA. And at one time, this was referred to as junk DNA, right? It was not known how important and impactful this other 98% of our DNA was. And that 98% makes up our emotions, our mode, our state of being. It really responds to our physical traits, how we respond to the world, how we respond to ourselves, how do we feel about ourselves, right? And our connection to the universe and our greater power, right? So that is what Bruce Lipton brought to the table. We now know that 98% of our DNA is what we call non-coding DNA. Okay, so what is the non-coding DNA? And we're also now going to look at the connection of non-coding DNA to our trauma today, right? So first, before we jump in today, I wanted to just look at the history of African Americans and connected that to present day trauma. So I made a small timeline. Well, we're not going that far back. I literally started at the 1800s, made it really simple. So in the 1800s, we have slavery and post-slavery, right? So we have slavery and then we're leaving out of slavery. From 1885 to 1940, African Americans are experiencing in U.S. territory, they're experiencing racism, segregation, there are killings, lynchings, lack of employment. The housing is pretty traumatic for African Americans. They're coming out of physical slavery, but also moving into what we know now as Black laws, needing a Black pass in order to travel. So they're going through severe racism in the U.S. between, for the sake of history, between the 1885 and 1940, right? So moving out of 1940, we're still dealing with those same things, but 1941, African Americans are now fighting in World War II, right? So that's the experience. In 1954 is when we have Board versus Brown of Education, right? Brown versus Board of Education, okay? And so that's pretty significant because look at it, that's in the 1950s. My mother was born in the 1950s. So here we can just see the possibility for generational anger, anxiety, fear, resentment, stress, dread, sorrow, concern, right? And this is because here we are. This is not long ago. We're literally just leaving out of slavery, physical slavery, but also when we count in the wars that we were exposed to, the wars that we fought in, while also fighting war right here in U.S. territory, right? So this is pretty impactful, and the reason why I'm bringing this up, we are now able to see how 98% of the DNA that we're made of is literally mirror behaviors and emotions of PTSD, right? And a lot of us are experiencing what we call secondary PTSD, and this is from being exposed through PTSD from parents. So parents who are dealing with PTSD literally expose their child to emotional and behavior conditionings, right? So this is very important because you get to see the connection between past historical experiences of African Americans and present day trauma. So a lot of these experiences, there have been, we haven't discussed. We are still battling, we are still emotionally in those flight and fight responses to the world, okay? And we're able to see it, right? We're able to see it in suicide rates. We're able to see it in drug abuse rates. We're able to see it in high school dropout rates among Black children. We're able to see it in reading levels, in academic performance. We're able to see it in depression levels among adolescent schoolgoers. So this is very important because we're literally seeing why we have to undo generational trauma. The trauma is trapped in our DNA. Now, what we do know is that DNA can change over time, right? So this is why we know we have the possibility, we have the capability to break generational traumas, to break these emotional states that are stuck in our DNA, right? And so they can change over time, but they're also stimulated by environmental conditions. So why is this important? Well, what we do know for sure is that during the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, a lot of African Americans were experiencing poverty-stricken areas. They were experiencing projects, right? And all of that is connected to the emotional conditioning of African American people. And this is literally why we are cleansing our DNA. So even on a chemical level, right? Feeding your body properly, eating certain foods, drinking water, you literally can pass on a healthier DNA, right? So and that's the goal, right? The goal is to literally pass and be able to procreate healthier children, right? Especially if you're still in the phase of procreating, you have the ability to create a healthier system which will impact your child and giving your fetus a different pre-programming, right? And so when we look at the pre-programmings that we receive from our history, right? The history of slavery, the history of segregation and racism and lynchings, dealing with all of those aspects created these deep rooted depressions and anxieties and behaviors and patterns and responses in us that we must unravel and we must undo. And because we see that these behaviors are literally impacted and infected for so many generations, yes, it takes time to undo that, but we know that it is scientifically possible. It is proven that you can change these things, right? So let's look at some of the works of Bruce, right? And this is Bruce Limpton, and just phenomenal work. I mean, this guy is brilliant. So let's look at this. Non-coding DNA is known to be affected by environmental stressors such as toxins and inadequate nutrients, as well as stressful emotions. The affected DNA transmits information that helps us prepare for life out of the womb, by ensuring that we have particular traits, we'll need to adapt to our environment, right? So here it is, from the womb, we are able to start passing on negative emotions, negative thought patterns, and negative behaviors to our child, right? And what we do know with one of the things that Limpton proved was how stress can be transmitted in sperm and eggs. So the emotions and behaviors and personality traits of our parents is in is within the sperm and egg, and is passed in this non-coding DNA, right? So that you can very well be carrying the negative behavior patterns and negative emotions and low vibrational thoughts of your parents, is literally in the end of your grandparents, right? We know this is for generations, and at least it's been proven 3 generations, and they have science to prove that even more, right? Okay. So here they're saying, for example, the child of a parent who early in life lived in a war zone may inherit the impulse in response to sudden bomb threats and loud noises. Look how impactful that is, right? And so I saw here in chapter 2 as well, and this is inside It Didn't Start With You by Mark Woline. I thought this was pretty cool. They did a study using individuals who was impacted by 9/11 attacks in New York City, right? And they were looking at how the pregnant women in their second or third trimester who either were at or near the World Trade Center during 9/11 attacks in New York City, who went on to develop PTSD, delivered children who had low levels of certain stimuli. These children also exhibited increased distress in response to new stimuli. Wow. So they're able to see how the babies themselves had levels of the same hormones connected to PTSD. So here we're able to see how mothers are able to pass this on, and how stress, sadness, sorrow is literally, it impacts the DNA, right? And it impacts the DNA so much to the point where it creates genes called CRFI and CRF2, right? And so with these genes, the CRFI and CRF2 genes can be inherited from stressed mothers who share similar increased amounts, right? Scientists have documented numerous other genes that are also affected by trauma. So the genes CRFI and CRF2, among other genes, right, are also impacted by stressed mothers, right? This is some pretty powerful information. It scientifically proves how African American children are still dealing with the PTSD that their grandparents and great grandparents and great great grandparents experienced throughout the 1800s, the 1900s, and we can go even further back, right? And also with these connections, right, we're able to also see some of the same behavior patterns, the same thinking patterns. So although we're no longer, in 1941 in the World War II, we're still responding like that. Our bodies are still responding as if we are literally fighting a war. We're literally undoing generational trauma. So be patient with yourself. Give yourself grace, but be stern, right? Be stern and adamant about making those changes and make it a lifestyle. Make it something consistent. The more we work at it, the more we practice literally freeing ourselves a little more at a time, a little more at a time. Really, most of us don't realize how these experiences and the experiences of our ancestors are still hindering us today, right? We don't realize how even now our thinking patterns are impacted by those events. So here's to the best days of your life. I commend you for being on the journey. I commend you. Welcome to the best days of your life.